MSNBC, Fox News, Al Jazeera, and BBC News, live today from Madison, Wisconsin, for the 14th presidential debate. Today we have the lesser known, but not necessarily lesser-minded candidates, the economists. Let me introduce our candidates. From Madison, Wisconsin, Professor Stephen Durloff. From Madison, Wisconsin, Professor Christopher Taylor. From Madison, Wisconsin, Professor Noah Williams. From Madison, Wisconsin, Professor Xiao Shaoxi. And from Madison, Wisconsin, Professor Enkin Atai. Today's topic, naturally enough, is the economy. So to start, I would like each candidate to introduce themselves and explain their economic plan and how their policies would help the economy. First, Dr. Durloff.
Well, I'm certainly not going to insult the intelligence of the audience by introducing myself. That's even a joke. Wolf, I don't want to be critical. You're just completely clueless. That's the wrong question. The first question is, what policy effects are identified? And I am the only candidate running for president who has addressed this question systematically. You ask, what policies will facilitate economic growth? I have shown incontrovertibly none. You have no idea what will, based on the data, what will improve growth. Will handgun reduction reduce crime? We have no idea. The data don't speak to it. Is it the case that capital punishment deters? Sorry, the data don't speak to it. I can go on and on. And so what I pledge as president is that I will assure you that I will demonstrate that any policy proposed by any political party or candidate, its effects cannot be identified using available data. And what that will do is unite America, because it means any candidate is able to advocate anything they want because the data can't refute them. And so I promise, since I still am upset about the election, that I will implement the Democratic platform in 1972 with George McGovern.
How modern. Next up, Professor Taylor.
All right, let me tell you about my plan to lower unemployment. So unlike any of these other people on the stage, I've been there. I've rolled up my sleeves, I've looked at the CPS, and I've read the questions distinguishing out of the labor force from unemployment. And let me tell you, it's not pretty. And how do you even define searching for work in the internet age? So on day one of my presidency, I'm going to define in the labor force the way any reasonable person would. You're in the labor force if you have a job. Day one of my presidency, unemployment's gone.
Truly brilliant plan. Next up, Professor Williams.
Thanks, Wolf. First, let me say that this is an amazing country. I don't come from a long line of illustrious academics. My mother was a lecturer. She wasn't even on the tenure track. My father was a psychologist. But he had dreams. He had dreams that I would go beyond his silly discipline and study a real social science. My mother taught all those classes so that I didn't have to. But they knew that with enough hard work and enough top 5 publications, anyone can become a tenured professor. I'll go into my plan a little bit more later on, but let me just say that if elected, I will become the social planner. At date 0 of my administration, I will impose a Ramsey optimal fiscal policy. For too long, long, our government has been imposing distortionary taxes, raising revenue to fund exogenous government spending. The spending benefits nobody. It's like the government just takes the resources and throws them in the ocean. I have a plan to drain the oceans and retrieve those resources.
That is original. Our next candidate is Professor Skit.
My economic plan is to enact uniform inference. All decisions would be required to be uniform for all people. In the interest of progressivity, I will not require full identification. I will allow partial identification. For example of asymptotically, as the US population gets large, the policy will have optimal size. The economic benefit will be enormous because positives will be controlled.
I will have no idea what you just said. Our final candidate is Professor Adelaide.
Ladies and gentlemen of America, the biggest issue that we face today, behind sluggish productivity growth, unemployment, inequality, is that there is too much dispersion in the materials prices that manufacturers face. For a sample of homogeneous industries, the dispersion of productivity would be 7%. 7% lower if manufacturers face the same materials prices. That is why, as president, I will mandate that all firms pay the same materials prices.
Doesn't that occur in a competitive market? Now that the candidates have introduced themselves, I'm going to ask the candidates questions. These questions have been carefully screened by the University of Wisconsin Economic Department Prelim Committee. So, unfortunately, they're a bit on the elementary level. So, my first question is for Professor Skit. Professor Skit, you have done considerable work on and research on moment inequalities. If I understand that right, that means it's related to the so-called problem of the 1% and the work of Thomas Piketty. So, how would you alleviate inequality in the United States?
I'm happy to tell you that there is no need to alleviate inequality. My uniformly valid inequality test clearly indicates we have never been a nation of haves and have-nots. We are a nation of haves and soon-to-haves. Of people who have made it and those who will make it. Sure, now the top 1% are making a lot more than the bottom 1%. But wait, soon everybody will be in the top 1%.
Everybody, fantastic. I know the American public would really appreciate that, asymptotically. Next question for Professor Tabor. So I've been reading, and I find that in your 2011 Review of an Economics and Statistics paper, you argued that alpha hat is unbiased. But in the 2012 paper you published in the Annual Review of Economics, you state that alpha hat has negative bias. Are you a flip-flopper? Do you allow bias in your estimators?
Wolf, wolf, wolf. You're focusing on small sample properties. I'm not going to be the president of the sample. I'm going to be the president of the population. very abstract concept that you might not understand, but what we really care about is asymptotic properties of estimators. I would note that both of those cases have been asymptotic bias in alpha hat. So for the record, my alpha hats have consistently been inconsistent.
Too much asymptotics. Let's move on. My next question is for Professor Durloff. Professor Durloff, does your research on social interactions explain why North Koreans must all wear the same hairstyle?
Explain? I'll give you explain. My social interactions models can explain anything. Business cycles, scientific theory choice, welfare receipts. And the incredible thing is I can write paper after paper and use exactly the same model and just relabel the variables. What could be better than that? And furthermore, I've established that none of these models are identified, so nobody will ever know if they're absolute garbage.
Impressive.
Okay, I forgot. But I do pledge the American people that I'm ready to reorganize marriages, neighborhoods, schools, and firms to solve the identification problem. That's a social planner, Professor Tabor. No, he's...
I was going to say impressive, but now I'm confused. My next question is for Professor Atelier. You have written that sectoral shocks account for considerably more than half of output growth. I find that shocking. Are you advocating that the next president will need to shock the economy to make it grow? Like electric shock, like in that bad movie where what happens? What kind of shocks are you advocating?
Well, shocking or not, I have a plan that Americans can get behind. For too long, we've been discussing issues such as, can you identify the origins of this hairstyle or that? Sure, we can all do that. When I make it to Washington, I will institute 3 shocks. Decrease the price of petroleum. Improve productivity in the education sector. And,
I can't take it anymore. You know perfectly well there are 5 shocks, and you gotta add the shock if I don't win this damn election. Give me a break. Wait a minute. Shocked? You're shocked to find gambling in this establishment? Oh wait, this isn't Trivial Pursuit, that's economics.
okay, fine. 5 shocks. Okay, to education, to petroleum, and to the EPA.
Seriously, are shocks to the EPA what you're talking about?
No, sir. I'm talking about shocks to industries. The EPA needs to be rebuilt from scratch. But I'm talking about shocks to industries, to petroleum.
You can't name the third one?
Well, I guess I can't. Sorry. Oops.
That's a shock.
What's going on here? A debate without me, Donald J. Trump? I'm the only real candidate in 2016.
Mr. Trump, you've been in all the other debates. This one is reserved for the economists.
Economists? What should these people know? Look around. These people are wimps. They've never built anything, unlike me.
Mr. Trump, do you even have an economic plan?
An economic plan? We have millions of economists. We don't need that. We need one huge economist. Immigration's out of control. We need a wall. We need a huge wall. One huge economist, one huge wall. I had a show that well prepared me for firing all the economists. When elected, I'm going to go down the line and say, you're all fired.
Mr. Trump, let's talk about this next week at the debate hosted by Telemundo. I thought he would never leave. Okay, let's get back to the economic questions. My next question for Professor Tabor. stagnant real wages, global warming, and rising terrorism, how would you solve all these questions, all these problems?
Very simple. It just comes down to the Roy model. If I'm president, I'm changing the world to a Roy model. If you make more money as a fisherman, you fish. If you make more money as a hunter, you hunt. That's it. You don't have to worry about any of this other stuff.
What would, in that world, economists do? Okay, don't ask that question. Okay, let me turn to Professor Williams.
Wait a minute, I want to interrupt here. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not a seminar.
About time. I was starting to feel like one of those firms in a Calvo model that's been stuck charging the same price for year after year after year. But now the Calvo Ferry has told me it's my time.
Professor Williams, your research, you model the entire economy as one single representative agent. You suppose everyone has the same preferences, firms all produce a single good, and people live forever. Is that a comic book? Is this like Obamacare on steroids? What's going on here?
Well, first off, that's all true. I don't know about you, but I plan on living forever. We don't have time for this type of gotcha referee. Think of the situation we're in right now. We've got an administration filled with Keynesians who can't even name the true macroeconomy. Radical ISLM. Those who do a lot of proposals on this stage, but nobody else has come up with a plan to drain the oceans and retrieve those government resources. As you know, I've traveled, Wolf, I've traveled the country giving seminars on my campaign, and I've heard the same problem come up time and again. No, it's not lack of identification.
Weak instruments?
No, it's not weak instruments.
Asymptotic bias?
No, it's not asymptotic bias.
It's uncertainty shocks.
No, the number one problem facing our country today is incomplete markets. When I was in Iowa, I was talking with a Bewley worker. He keeps getting hit with all these undiversifiable income shocks, and all he can do is save in a risk-free bond. When I was in New Hampshire, I was talking to an entrepreneur at a Kiyotaki board plant, and all they could do was borrow up to a fraction theta of their assets. As president, I'm going to loosen these constraints and implement a complete set of state contingent securities. In fact, I suggest the department start right now by selling graduate students aero securities that pay off in the event they fail the prelims. More broadly, for too long, our economic policies have been determined sequentially. We can't even be sure of equilibrium existence and uniqueness. As president, I will appoint a Bellman commission to make sure we implement a recursive competitive equilibrium. Under a Williams administration, I will make sure everyone optimizes and markets clear.
I wonder if that's computationally feasible. I have another question for Professor C. Apparently, you are an expert on asymptotic size control. How would you deal with this burgeoning issue of out-of-control gun control?
I am a huge fan of gun control. My first act as president would be to immediately mandate that all guns sold in America is subject to uniform size control. That is, any gun not big enough to cook bacon with shall be banned. That way, all gun owners will be busy cooking breakfast, and gun violence will be eliminated uniformly.
Uniformly? That's impressive. I guess this was kind of really exciting debate tonight, but I do have one final question. I'd like to know if, in this group here, if anyone's really serious, that is, would they be willing to take the pledge, here and now, take the pledge that if called, if elected to be the next U.S. president, you would actually step up and take that job if elected?
Yes. Colleagues, I pledge that if you elect me the next department chair, sorry. I didn't mean department chair, I meant president. Colleagues, if you elect me the next president, I pledge to raise all your teaching loads by 2 courses per year.
Anybody else? Anybody for 3? Okay, well in that case, thank you and good night from Madison, Wisconsin.